Hey guys, now it's time to continue our discussion about methods, and in this video we will see how we can return something from a method. But before we do that, let me first explain what is the difference between methods and functions, because I use those terms interchangeably. So what are methods? In Java, the term method and function are often used interchangeably by people, like I did, but there is a technical distinction between them in the context of Java programming. In Java, a method is a block of code that performs a specific task and is associated with an object. We'll see what objects and classes are in our discussion about object-oriented programming. Methods are part of a class and are used to define the behavior of objects. Again, we'll see what all of this is in our discussion about the object-oriented programming. They are called using the dot notation on an instance of a class. On the other hand, the term function is more commonly associated with languages that support functional programming paradigms, where functions are standalone and can be used without an associated object. Java, being an object-oriented programming language, primarily uses methods within classes. So, while it's common for people to refer to both methods and functions as functions in casual conversation, it is technically more accurate to use the term method when working with Java due to the object-oriented nature of language. So look what happens if I put this method outside the class. Look what happens. So if I put this outside the class, you have everything underlined. It says main classes are not supported language level 17. So in other words, it's saying that you cannot define your methods outside the class. Methods are part of a class. So they need to be defined inside of a class, and we'll see again in our discussion about object-oriented programming why. So if I put this now inside the main class, now everything works fine. Now let's create another function here. I'll type public because now we're gonna see how we can use the return keyword or the return statement. So I'm gonna type public static. Now we're gonna, instead of void, which means that we don't return anything, I'm gonna put here int because we're gonna return a number. I'm gonna call this method getMax. I'm gonna define two parameters, one num1, which is gonna be an integer, and one num2, which is gonna be also an integer. Then I will put curly braces and I will press enter. Now we have an underline here and it says missing return statement. So you said here that you're going to return an integer, you're going to return a number in this method, and now it's expecting us to return that number. So what I will do, I'll type here if, because this method is going to return the maximum number between two numbers that are passed to our parameters. So I'm going to put if num1 is greater than num2, that means that we need to return back to the method the num1, because the num1 is the one which is bigger. So I'm going to type return, the return keyword, num1, and now that is going to return num1 when if the condition is true. Else, curly braces, I'm going to return num2, because if the num1 is not bigger than num2, that means that num2 is bigger. So I'm going to put num2 here, and if they are equal, the num2 is going to be returned. Now I'll go up here and I'll delete this, calling this method, and I'll type here getMax. And now as you can see, while I am typing, as you can see, it has two parameters, num1 and num2. So you need to pass those values. So I'm going to press enter, and now it's expecting us, as you can see, it's highlighted and it's also showing that little window int num1. So I'm going to type 5 and 3. And semicolon, of course. Now, if we run this code, look what happens, what we get in the output. We get in the output nothing, because this calling of the method returns that number which is bigger, but we didn't catch that number here. So we need to get that number when we send it back. So I'm gonna put here int max, so define a variable, int max, and I'll put equals to get max, and now this is gonna return us the number which is bigger, because if you press shift control P on this, as you can see, this is an integer, so it returns a number, so you can catch that number here in this max variable. And then I'll put SOUT max. So now if you run this, we get 5. And if you try with other numbers, 10, let's say, and 100, let's run it, we get 100. So now everything works fine. Another important thing to point out about the return statement is that when the return statement is called, the code which comes below of the return statement is not going to be executed. So if I put here after the return SOUT, let's say this is a print line. If I hover over under this, it says unreachable statement. This is because after you type the return keyword and you return something, or if you type the return keyword without returning something. So if I just type here return, and let's change this to void to show me the correct error. So if you put here, as you can see, it says the same thing, reachable statement. So when you type the return keyword, the function is stopped at that point. It's not going to return any lines of code which come below of the return statement. Let's press Ctrl Z to have the code that we had previously. Let's delete this. Alright, and this is our discussion about the return keyword, and I'll see you in the next video.